"Don't make me do this," she whispered. What the rancher did next outraged the town. Nestled between rolling hills and wide-open fields, it was a place where everyone knew everyone else, and nothing much ever changed. The streets were lined with modest houses, each with small gardens that families tended carefully. The air was usually filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint aroma of baked bread from the local bakery. On most days, life moved slowly here, and people were content with their routines. Children ran freely through the streets, laughing as they played, while their parents waved from porches or worked quietly in their yards. Evenings were often spent sitting on wooden benches, watching the sun sink behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Among the people of Willow Creek, there was one figure who stood out more than most. Tom Lawson, the rancher, was known to everyone in the town. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face that spoke of years spent working outdoors. His hands were calloused, and his eyes, sharp and thoughtful, seemed to miss nothing. Tom had inherited his family's ranch decades ago, and over the years, he had built it into one of the largest and most well-kept properties in the area. His herd of cattle was the pride of the town, and the way he managed his land showed a combination of hard work, knowledge, and quiet determination that few could match. Despite the respect he commanded, Tom was also a figure of quiet fear. People admired him, but they didn't always understand him. He was strict and unwavering in his ways, insisting that things be done properly and efficiently. Neighbors often whispered about his stern demeanor, and though he rarely spoke ill of anyone, his silence sometimes made people uneasy. Tom wasn't unfriendly, but he didn't go out of his way to make small talk. He preferred the company of his land, his animals, and the tasks that needed attention each day. Children were cautious around him, and even adults gave him a wide berth at times. Yet in the heart of Willow Creek, there was no denying that Tom Lawson was a man to be reckoned with, and his influence reached far beyond the boundaries of his ranch. Life in Willow Creek followed a predictable rhythm, but that calmness hid the small tensions that simmered beneath the surface. Families struggled with financial challenges, friendships were tested by misunderstandings, and the occasional disagreements over property lines or grazing rights reminded everyone that even a peaceful town had its share of conflicts. Still, there was a sense of security here, a belief that, no matter what, people looked out for each other in the quiet ways that mattered most. The town had its traditions, and everyone knew their place within them. This was the world Tom lived in, a world where rules were followed and actions carried consequences. On one particular afternoon, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and the distant sound of cattle moving through the pastures created a soothing rhythm. The town seemed almost suspended in a perfect moment of peace. Most people were finishing their daily chores or preparing for the evening, unaware that this day would soon be remembered for something unusual, something that would stir the town in ways no one could have anticipated. Near the edge of Tom's property, a young woman named Leela Parker walked carefully along a narrow path. Leela was known throughout the town for her gentle nature and kind heart. She had grown up in Willow Creek, and though she was quiet, she had a presence that drew people to her. Her dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and her eyes held a mix of curiosity and caution. She often helped her father with small tasks around their home, and sometimes assisted neighbors with errands. On this day, she had been helping her father with chores, carrying water buckets to the garden and gathering firewood for the evening. She loved the peacefulness of the fields and the quiet beauty of the town, but she also carried a weight, a worry that made her steps more careful, her movements deliberate. As she walked near the ranch, Leela's thoughts wandered. She thought about the responsibilities she carried, the expectations of her family, and the quiet longing for something beyond the boundaries of Willow Creek. Her mind was full of questions she didn't yet have answers for, and her heart was heavy with a mix of hope and fear. She had always admired Tom from a distance, aware of his reputation and his accomplishments. There was a sense of awe whenever she saw him working, how he could handle the cattle, mend fences, and manage his land with such skill and precision. But admiration was different from interaction, and she had never had the courage to speak to him directly, not until this day. As fate would have it, she accidentally wandered a little too close to the ranch. The tall fences marked the boundaries clearly, but her curiosity and distraction had led her near a gate she hadn't noticed before. Tom, who was inspecting a section of the fence, saw her immediately. His sharp eyes didn't miss the small figure approaching his property, and he walked quickly toward her, his long strides covering the distance in seconds. Leela froze, realizing that she had been spotted. Her heart raced, and she felt a sudden panic, unsure of what to say or do. She had heard the stories, the whispered warnings about the rancher's strictness, and now she faced him directly. "Hey," Tom called in a calm but firm voice, stopping a few feet away. Leela looked up at him, her hands trembling slightly. She could see the seriousness in his eyes, the way he studied her carefully as if trying to understand her intentions. She wanted to explain herself, to tell him she hadn't meant to intrude, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered something she would later remember vividly. "Don't make me do this." The words were soft, almost inaudible, but they carried a weight that surprised even Tom. There was fear in them, yes, but also a quiet determination. Leela's voice, though small, held an urgency that made Tom pause. He had seen many situations in his life, challenges with his ranch, disputes among neighbors, and problems that seemed impossible to solve. But this moment was different. He didn't fully understand what she meant yet, but he sensed that it was serious. The whisper seemed to linger in the air, echoing through the quiet fields and catching the attention of anyone who might have been nearby. Tom took a deep breath and knelt slightly to meet her gaze more directly. "What is it, Leela?" he asked gently. There was no anger in his tone, only concern. For a moment, the tension between them hung like a fragile thread, connecting two very different lives in a way that would soon become important. Leela's eyes met his, and for the first time she felt a small measure of relief. He was not harsh or threatening, he was listening. And in that listening, there was a sense of hope. At that moment, the town of Willow Creek remained unaware of the significance of the encounter. People went about their routines, unaware that a conversation near a quiet ranch would soon ripple through the community. Children laughed in the distance, and birds sang as the sun dipped lower. But for Tom and Leela, the world had shifted slightly, and a path was opening that neither of them could yet see fully. This was the beginning of something that would challenge expectations, stir emotions, and test the courage of everyone involved. The calm of the town, the predictable rhythms of daily life, were about to be interrupted by a story that would be remembered for years to come. Tom stood there weighing his next step. He could see the worry etched on Leela's face, and he knew that whatever was about to happen, it required careful thought and action. He had always been a man of decisions, a man who acted quickly when necessary, but this was different. This required understanding, patience, and a willingness to step beyond what the town considered acceptable. And though he did not yet know the full details, he resolved quietly in his mind that he would help, no matter the cost. This resolve, silent and steadfast, would soon set the stage for events that would captivate the entire town of Willow Creek. After that quiet but intense moment near the edge of the ranch, Leela stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Her heart still pounded in her chest, and she could feel the sweat forming on her palms. She had never spoken words like those before, words that carried such fear and yet such determination. The whisper, "Don't make me do this," had come from deep inside her, and she could not take it back. She had hoped that somehow the world would stay calm, that no one would notice the tremor in her voice. But Tom Lawson, standing there with a mix of concern and quiet authority, had noticed. He had heard every word. Tom's sharp eyes softened as he looked at her. He could see the struggle in her expression, the mix of worry and courage that was unusual for someone so young. Most people in the town would have spoken up boldly or stayed silent, but Leela's words were different. They carried weight. They hinted at something serious, something she felt she could not handle alone. Tom knew that this moment required care, not force, and that the way forward would not be simple. He also sensed that the path he chose could affect not just her but the entire town. "Leela," he said again, a little louder this time, "look at me. Tell me what's going on." His voice was calm but firm, the kind of voice that carried trust and authority at the same time. Leela hesitated. She wanted to explain, to tell him everything, but the fear inside her kept words from forming. She took a small step back, feeling the rough ground beneath her boots, and her eyes welled up. It was strange for her to feel both scared and hopeful at the same time, but there was something about Tom's presence that made her feel safe enough to try. Finally she spoke, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know if I can do it," she admitted. "I can't do this by myself, and I don't want to cause trouble." She looked down at the ground, ashamed, though she wasn't sure why. She had always tried to do what was right, and yet here she was, in a situation that felt overwhelming. The rancher, tall and steady, listened quietly. He did not interrupt, did not judge, and in that silence, Leela felt a small sense of relief. Tom knew that he had to tread carefully. He had faced challenges on his ranch before, storms, injured animals, disagreements with neighbors, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this kind of delicate human problem. He wanted to help, but he also understood the importance of listening first. "You don't have to do anything alone," he said finally, his voice gentle. "I'm here now. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The words seemed to comfort Leela, though the tension did not leave entirely. She took a deep breath and lifted her eyes to meet his. It's complicated," she admitted. "I've been trying to handle it myself, but I can't. I was afraid of what people would think, afraid of what might happen if I ask for help." Her voice trembled, but there was honesty and courage in her admission. Tom nodded slowly, understanding that the first step towards solving any problem was acknowledging it openly. The rancher motioned for her to follow him toward a shaded area near a small grove of trees on his property. It was a quiet spot where they could speak without anyone overhearing. As they walked, Leela felt her shoulders relax slightly. The weight of secrecy and fear had been heavy, but the act of speaking, of being heard, offered a small sense of relief. She noticed the way Tom moved with confidence, steady and unhurried, as if he had faced challenges far greater than her own. And perhaps he had. She had heard the stories about his life, the hard work on the ranch, the storms he had weathered, the obstacles he had overcome. Yet in that moment, what mattered most was that he was here for her. Once they reached the shade, Leela sat on a fallen log, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tom remained standing, giving her space but remaining close enough that she felt supported. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the familiar sense of the fields and the distant sound of cattle moving in the pastures. It was a peaceful scene, but underneath it, a quiet tension lingered. Leela's thoughts raced, thinking about the consequences of her actions, the expectations of her family, and the judgment of the town. Finally, she spoke again, more clearly this time. I don't know if anyone will understand," she said. "And I don't know if I can explain it properly." Her voice was small but steady, showing a bravery that she hadn't realized she possessed. Tom knelt down slightly to meet her at eye level. "You don't have to explain everything at once," he said. "Start with what you can. We'll figure the rest out together." She hesitated, then began to tell him pieces of her struggle. She spoke about her responsibilities at home, the expectations of the town, and the pressure she had felt for as long as she could remember. She spoke about moments of fear, of being unsure of herself, and of the deep worry that had built up over time. Tom listened carefully, his expression serious but calm. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice immediately. He simply listened, and in that listening, Leela began to feel a shift. She realized that someone truly cared about her perspective, someone who could offer guidance without judgment. As she spoke, she noticed the gentleness in Tom's eyes. It was not the harshness that some of the townspeople had warned her about, but a steady and quiet determination to help. There was a patience in him that was rare, and it made her feel seen and understood. The fear that had weighed so heavily on her began to lessen, replaced by a cautious hope. She realized that by trusting him, she had taken the first step toward resolving her problem. After some time, she finished speaking, her voice trailing off as exhaustion and relief mingled together. Tom remained quiet for a moment, allowing her words to settle. Then he spoke, carefully choosing each word. "Leela, you're stronger than you think," he said. "And you're not alone. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise I'll stand by you." Her eyes welled up again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. She had feared judgment, rejection, and misunderstanding, but in this quiet moment on the edge of the ranch, she realized that someone had heard her. Someone had acknowledged her struggle and was willing to help without criticism. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, and it left her both humbled and encouraged. As the sun continued to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Tom and Leela made tentative plans for the next steps. They did not speak of all the details, knowing that the path ahead would unfold gradually. What mattered was that Leela no longer felt alone, and that Tom had committed himself to helping her in whatever way he could. The connection forged in that quiet moment was simple but profound. It was built on trust, empathy, and a shared understanding that sometimes courage meant asking for help and standing together. Unbeknownst to them, the events that were quietly unfolding near the ranch were about to capture the attention of the entire town. Willow Creek had always been a place of calm routines, but that calm was fragile. When the news eventually spread, the townspeople would be shocked, divided, and intrigued by the choices made by Tom Lawson and the mysterious circumstances surrounding Leela Parker. But for now, in that quiet grove of trees, none of that mattered. What mattered was trust, courage, and the unspoken promise that no one had to face their struggles alone. As evening approached, the sky turned brilliant shades of pink and gold, and the first stars began to twinkle above. Leela felt a sense of peace she had not known for a long time. She knew challenges lay ahead, but she also knew that with Tom's support, she could face them. And Tom, observing the horizon and feeling the cool breeze on his face, silently resolved to do whatever was necessary to protect and guide her, even if it meant going against the expectations of the town. In the quiet moments before darkness fell, a bond had formed, a bond that would be tested, celebrated, and remembered in Willow Creek for years to come. And all of it had begun with a whisper, a fearful yet determined whisper that would set in motion a story no one in the town could forget. After listening to Leela and understanding the depth of her struggle, Tom Lawson knew he had reached a critical point. The quiet town of Willow Creek had expectations, rules, and traditions, and everyone thought they understood how things should be handled. But this situation was different. It was personal, delicate, and demanded action. Tom had faced difficult choices before, storms that threatened his cattle, disputes over property, and problems that required careful judgment. But nothing compared to the weight of responsibility he now felt for Leela. He realized that the decision he made in the next few moments could change not only her life, but also the way the town would view him forever. He stood silently for a moment, gazing across the rolling fields that stretched from his ranch. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with deep orange and pink hues. The cattle were lowing in the distance, and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees created a soothing, almost hypnotic rhythm. Yet inside Tom, a storm was brewing, a storm of thought, responsibility, and moral questioning. He knew that acting too quickly without understanding the full consequences could cause harm, but hesitating too long could leave Leela vulnerable. He had always believed in making decisions with both strength and wisdom, and now he would have to rely on every lesson he had learned over decades. Leela, sitting nearby on the old log, watched him closely. She could see the intensity in his eyes and the subtle way his jaw tightened as he weighed the options. She knew that he had to make a choice, and she hoped that whatever he decided would help her rather than worsen the situation. Fear mixed with hope, creating a tension that made her heart pound. She had spent so long trying to handle everything alone, afraid of what might happen if she spoke up, but now she realized that she needed him. She needed his guidance, his courage, and his willingness to act even when the outcome was uncertain. Finally, Tom spoke, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority and experience. "Leela, I understand what you're facing and I will help. But we have to be clear. This will not be easy, and it may not be understood by everyone. The town may not agree with what we do, but I cannot stand by and do nothing while you struggle." Leela's eyes widened slightly at his words. She had expected hesitation or caution, but instead, she found determination and a quiet promise of protection. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice small and tentative. She did not fully understand the scope of what Tom was proposing, but she sensed that it was serious. Tom looked out over the fields for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I mean that I will take steps to help you, even if it means going against what people expect. I will do what is right, not what is convenient or popular. This is about you and about ensuring your safety and peace of mind." His words carried a weight that made Leela's breath catch. It was rare for anyone in Willow Creek to challenge the traditions or the expectations of the town, but Tom Lawson had always been a man who acted according to principle rather than opinion. Leela nodded slowly, still unsure of the full meaning but trusting him more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Her voice was filled with relief, mixed with lingering fear. She had imagined all sorts of outcomes, most of them frightening, but this act of understanding and courage was far beyond anything she had hoped for. Over the next few days, Tom began putting his plan into motion. It was not something that could be accomplished in a single day. There were arrangements to make, precautions to take, and careful steps to ensure that Leela's situation could be addressed safely. He coordinated quietly, speaking with a few trusted allies who could help, always mindful of the town's watchful eyes. Every move was deliberate, every action measured, because he knew that even the smallest mistake could cause unnecessary attention or misunderstanding. Despite his caution, rumors began to stir in the town. Willow Creek was small, and people noticed unusual activity. Some noticed Leela visiting the ranch more often than usual, and whispers started to circulate. "What is Tom Lawson up to?" people asked. "Why is Leela there so often?" Others speculated wildly, creating theories that ranged from the mundane to the dramatic. The town had never seen Tom act in such a public but discreet way. His normal routine had always been private, efficient, and solitary. Now, people watched with curiosity, confusion, and sometimes suspicion. Tom paid little attention to the gossip. He had always known that people would talk, and he had learned long ago not to let the opinions of others dictate his actions. What mattered was Leela's safety, her peace of mind, and the rightness of the steps he was taking. And so he continued quietly, carefully, and decisively. Each day he checked the fences, ensured the cattle were secure, and coordinated with Leela in ways that provided guidance and reassurance. It was not easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him, and moments when he wondered whether the town would ever forgive or understand his actions. Meanwhile, Leela's own confidence grew. She saw in Tom a man who acted with courage and wisdom, someone who did not flinch in the face of difficulty. He did not lecture her, nor did he force her into decisions she was unprepared to make. Instead, he guided her, supporting her choices while gently encouraging her to see her own strength. She realized that courage was not always about bold action. It was often about quiet determination, about having someone trustworthy by your side, and about finding the will to face challenges despite fear. But not everyone in Willow Creek understood the situation. As word of Tom's involvement with Leela began to spread, some townspeople reacted with outrage. They saw his actions as a breach of tradition, an overstepping of authority, and a challenge to the social norms that governed daily life. Some whispered harshly behind closed doors, criticizing him for intervening in matters they did not fully understand. Others expressed concern for Leela, wondering whether she was being influenced or pressured. The tension in the town began to rise, creating an atmosphere of quiet debate and speculation. Yet Tom remained steadfast. He knew that taking the right action was more important than gaining approval. In his mind, the town's outrage was secondary to ensuring that Leela was safe, and that her situation was addressed properly. He understood that history often judged harshly those who acted boldly and wisely, before the wider community could appreciate the reasoning behind their decisions. And he was prepared to face that judgment if it came, because some choices were not made for popularity. They were made for what was right. As the days went on, Tom's plan began to take shape. He arranged meetings, made careful preparations, and guided Leela step by step. Each action, no matter how small, was deliberate and thoughtful. He ensured that potential risks were minimized, that Leela's well-being remained the priority, and that the situation was handled with discretion and care. It was a balancing act, between privacy and exposure, between safety and caution, between action and reflection. Every day, he faced the challenge with quiet resolve, knowing that the outcome could change lives forever. During this time, the bond between Tom and Leela grew stronger. She began to see him not just as a rancher, but as a protector and mentor, someone who could navigate the difficulties of life with skill, wisdom, and heart. He, in turn, saw her resilience, her courage, and her willingness to face challenges despite fear. They formed a partnership built on trust and respect, a partnership that would become the foundation for the decisions yet to come. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the fields, Tom stood at the edge of the pasture and reflected on the choices he had made. He knew that the town would be divided in its opinion, some praising him, some criticizing him. But he also knew that Leela's safety, dignity, and peace of mind were worth more than approval or applause. In that quiet moment, he resolved that no matter the outcome, he would continue to act with integrity, courage, and compassion. He would face the town, confront its questions, and accept whatever came next, knowing that he had done what was right. And so, the rancher's controversial decision had been made. It was not a decision born of impulse, but of careful thought, empathy, and courage. It was a decision that would challenge expectations, stir debate, and inspire reflection. For Leela, it was a lifeline, a promise of support and protection. For the town of Willow Creek, it was the beginning of a story that would be talked about for years, a story of courage, morality, and the quiet strength that could emerge in even the most unlikely moments. The news of Tom Lawson's unusual actions spread through Willow Creek faster than anyone could have anticipated. Small towns had a way of noticing everything, And when someone as prominent as Tom took steps that went beyond the usual routines, people could not help but talk. It started with whispers in the local general store, where neighbors exchanged cautious glances and quietly speculated. "Have you seen what Tom's been doing with Leela Parker?" one woman asked. The question was met with nods and murmurs from others who had noticed the young woman visiting the ranch more often. Rumors grew, twisting the facts into tales that were sometimes more dramatic than the reality. By the next morning, the conversation had spread to every corner of the town. People gathered outside the bakery, at the schoolyard, and even on the front porches of their homes, discussing the situation in hushed tones. Some were curious, some disapproving, and a few genuinely worried about Leela's safety. The town had always valued order and tradition, and Tom's actions were unlike anything they had seen before. While many respected him, they were unsure if they approved of him stepping into a situation so boldly and publicly. Questions circulated. Was it his business to intervene? Was he doing the right thing? And most importantly, what was really happening at the ranch? Meanwhile, Tom continued his careful work, aware of the growing attention but focused on what truly mattered, supporting Leela. Each day, he balanced caution with action, ensuring that her needs were addressed while trying to maintain some level of discretion. He knew that people would judge without knowing the full story, but he refused to let gossip or opinion alter the decisions he had made in her best interest. Every step was deliberate, every plan carefully thought out. He checked the fences, ensured the cattle were secure, and helped Leela navigate the challenges she faced, all while keeping her confidence and well-being as his priority. Leela, too, noticed the subtle changes around her. She could feel the town's curiosity, even as she and Tom worked quietly to resolve the situation. At first, the whispers made her anxious. She worried about what people might say, whether they would misunderstand her, or whether their opinions would make her struggle even more complicated. But as days passed, she grew stronger. She realized that she was not alone, and that Tom's support gave her courage she had not felt before. Every small step forward, every success in facing her challenges, became a reminder that determination and trust could overcome fear. The division in the town became more evident as the story unfolded. Some people were openly critical of Tom, claiming that he had overstepped his bounds and interfered in matters that did not concern him. They questioned his motives and wondered whether his involvement was appropriate. In the evenings, these critics gathered on porches or near the town square, speaking in low tones about the unusual behavior of the rancher. Their words carried a mix of concern, suspicion, and sometimes resentment. They believed that Tom, despite his experience and respectability, should have left the matter alone and allowed the town's norms to guide Leela's path. Yet not everyone felt this way. Another group of townspeople quietly admired his courage and integrity. They understood that some situations required bold action, and that doing what was right often meant challenging expectations. These supporters observed from a distance, nodding in quiet approval as they saw Tom acting with patience, empathy, and decisiveness. They recognized the rarity of such a combination of qualities in someone, especially a man who lived by the practical demands of the land. For them, Tom's actions were a lesson in moral courage and personal responsibility, a reminder that leadership was not always about authority, but about standing up for what was just. The tension in Willow Creek grew with each passing day. Conversations were no longer just whispers, they became debates. At the local church, people discussed the situation during gatherings, weighing the ethical and social implications. At the school, teachers and parents spoke quietly about what they had heard, wondering aloud whether the town would ever view Tom the same way again. It seemed as though every corner of the community had a voice in the matter, and every voice carried its own interpretation of events. Despite the growing public attention, Tom remained calm and focused. He had faced scrutiny before, both from neighbors and from the natural challenges of ranch life, but he had learned the importance of perseverance and clarity of purpose. He continued to act with consistency and integrity, knowing that the truth of his actions would ultimately reveal itself through results, not gossip. His priority remained Leela's well-being, and he refused to let the opinions of others distract him from the careful steps required to guide her through the challenges she faced. Leela noticed the subtle ways the town reacted to her presence and Tom's support. At first, the attention made her self-conscious and nervous. She worried about judgment and what others might think, but gradually she began to see a different perspective. People's curiosity and even criticism highlighted the importance of her journey and the significance of Tom's guidance. She realized that courage was not just about facing personal challenges. It also meant standing firm in the face of public scrutiny. With Tom by her side, she could navigate both her personal struggle and the community's reactions with greater confidence. As the town debated and speculated, moments of confrontation began to appear. A few townspeople approached the ranch directly, seeking answers or questioning Tom's judgment. Some were polite but persistent, asking why he had involved himself so deeply and what his intentions were. Others were more confrontational, challenging his authority and suggesting that he had overstepped social boundaries. Tom met these interactions with calm firmness, explaining only what was necessary, never reacting with anger or frustration. His measured responses revealed a balance of confidence and respect that gradually shifted the tone of some interactions, even among skeptics. In private moments, Tom reflected on the unusual attention. He understood that his actions were unconventional and that people would not always understand his motivations. But he also knew that acting out of principle, for the right reasons, was more important than seeking approval. Every decision he made was guided by a clear sense of responsibility and moral clarity. He had committed himself to Leela's safety and growth, and nothing, not gossip, not debate, not criticism, would alter that commitment. The situation also prompted broader reflections within the community. Some residents began to reconsider their own judgments, recognizing that sometimes tradition and convention could limit understanding. Others saw Tom's actions as a demonstration of courage and humanity, inspiring them to approach their own challenges with more thoughtfulness and empathy. The town, divided yet attentive, slowly began to see that change often began with one person willing to act decisively, even when the majority was uncertain. Through it all, Tom and Leela continued their work quietly but steadily. Each day brought new steps, small victories, and moments of reassurance. Tom guided her with patience and wisdom, and Leela learned to trust herself and her own judgment. They faced challenges together, navigating the tension between private actions and public scrutiny with skill and calm determination. The bond between them strengthened, built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of standing firm despite fear and uncertainty. Even as the town's attention remained high, there were glimpses of understanding and admiration. People began to see that Tom's actions, though unconventional, were grounded in genuine concern and moral courage. They observed his consistency, his careful guidance, and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Slowly, some critics softened their stance, acknowledging that perhaps there was more to the story than they initially believed. Others, while still skeptical, could not deny the results of his careful and principled approach. By the end of the week, the town had entered a new phase of awareness. The gossip, curiosity, and debate continued, but there was also a growing recognition that what Tom had done required courage and moral clarity. People began to discuss not only the situation itself, but also the broader lessons it offered. The importance of standing by what is right, the value of empathy, and the strength required to act boldly in the face of uncertainty. In the quiet moments of evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of deep orange and purple, Tom and Leela stood together near the edge of the ranch. The world around them remained filled with questions and opinions, but in that space, they shared a sense of accomplishment and reassurance. They had faced the challenges together, navigated the scrutiny of the town, and taken steps that were difficult but necessary. Their shared experience had created a bond that could not be broken by rumors or misunderstanding. And so, the town of Willow Creek continued to watch, talk, and debate. Some remained critical, some supportive, and some curious, but all were aware that something unusual and remarkable had occurred. Tom Lawson, the rancher, had taken action that was brave, principled, and controversial. Leela Parker had faced her own challenges with growing courage and trust. And the quiet town, once predictable and routine, had been touched by an event that would linger in memory for years to come, teaching lessons about courage, integrity, and the complexities of human judgment. As the days passed, the tension in Willow Creek slowly began to shift. The story of Tom Lawson and Leela Parker had captured the attention of everyone in the town, and people continued to speculate, discuss, and even argue about the rancher's bold actions. Yet amid the whispers and debates, the results of Tom's careful decisions became increasingly clear. Leela's situation, once uncertain and filled with fear, was beginning to improve. Her confidence grew each day, and the challenges that had once seemed impossible now appeared manageable, thanks to Tom's guidance. The town could not ignore that positive change had taken place, even if opinions about the methods varied. Leela had learned to trust herself more than she ever had. She had faced her fears, leaned on someone who truly cared for her well-being, and taken steps forward that she would not have dared to take alone. She realized that courage was not simply a matter of bold actions. It was about persistence, patience, and the ability to rely on others when needed. And through it all, Tom had been there, quietly and steadily, helping her navigate every challenge. He had provided guidance, reassurance, and protection, ensuring that she could grow stronger while remaining safe. For Tom, the experience had been both demanding and rewarding. He had faced the scrutiny of the town, balanced the weight of responsibility, and acted in a way that some viewed as controversial. But the sight of Leela finding her strength and overcoming her struggles reminded him of why he had chosen this path. The satisfaction of knowing that his actions had made a meaningful difference outweighed any criticism or gossip that had come his way. He had acted with integrity and courage, and in doing so had demonstrated to the town a principle that was often overlooked, that doing what is right sometimes required breaking expectations and standing firm in the face of judgment. The town's reactions continued to evolve. At first, skepticism and outrage had dominated conversations, and some residents had even confronted Tom directly. But as people observed the results of his efforts, opinions began to change. They saw that Leela was thriving, that she carried herself with greater confidence, and that her life was no longer burdened by the fears and pressures that had previously held her back. Even some of the harshest critics began to acknowledge that perhaps Tom had acted wisely and compassionately, even if his methods were unconventional. Slowly, a sense of respect began to replace doubt, and the town's overall perception of the rancher shifted from suspicion to admiration. Still, the journey had not been without moments of difficulty. Leela occasionally doubted herself, questioning whether she could handle the challenges before her or whether she was relying too heavily on Tom. And there were days when Tom felt the weight of responsibility more acutely, wondering whether he had made the right decisions and whether the town would ever truly understand his intentions. But through each obstacle, the two of them leaned on one another, forming a bond built on trust, respect, and shared determination. It was this partnership that allowed them to face adversity with resilience, knowing that they were not alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the fields in a golden glow, Leela and Tom stood together near the edge of the ranch. The sky was filled with warm colors, the gentle breeze carried the familiar scents of grass and earth, and the distant sound of cattle moving through the pastures created a soothing backdrop. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a pause to consider how far they had come. Leela looked at Tom, gratitude and admiration shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't think I could have done this without you." Tom smiled, a mixture of humility and satisfaction in his expression. "You've done the hard part," he replied. "I've only helped guide you. The strength was always yours." In that moment, Leela realized the truth of his words. She had faced her fears, made difficult choices, and embraced her own courage. Tom's support had been invaluable, but the growth and determination she had discovered within herself were what truly mattered. The town, too, began to see the impact of Tom's actions more clearly. People noticed changes in their community. Leela's renewed confidence inspired others. Small acts of kindness became more common, and the example of courage and principle set by Tom prompted reflection among many residents. Conversations shifted from judgment to consideration, as neighbors began to discuss what it truly meant to act with integrity, empathy, and courage. Lessons were learned quietly, subtly, as people absorbed the demonstration of moral strength that had unfolded before them. Despite the growing respect for Tom, some residents still struggled with the idea that a single individual could challenge norms and expectations so decisively. There were discussions about fairness, tradition, and community standards, but even among those who remained skeptical, there was acknowledgement that the outcome had been positive. Slowly, it became clear that the true measure of a decision lay not only in adherence to rules, but in the results it produced and the lives it affected. In this case, the actions of one determined rancher had changed the life of a young woman and, in doing so, had taught the town valuable lessons about courage, compassion, and integrity. As the days turned into weeks, life in Willow Creek began to settle into a new rhythm. The story of Tom Lawson and Leela Parker remained a topic of conversation, but it had transformed from gossip and speculation to admiration and reflection. The town had witnessed a remarkable example of human empathy and bravery, and many residents quietly carried the lessons into their own lives. They realized that doing what is right often required courage, patience, and sometimes the willingness to act against expectations. For Leela, the experience had been transformative. She had faced challenges she never thought possible, and she had grown stronger with each step. She had learned the value of trust, the power of courage, and the importance of leaning on those who genuinely cared for her well-being. And in Tom Lawson, she had found not just a protector but a mentor and guide, someone whose actions embodied integrity, wisdom, and quiet strength. Tom, for his part, returned to his routine on the ranch with a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction. He continued to manage his land and cattle with diligence, but he also carried the knowledge that he had made a meaningful difference in someone's life. The town's opinions no longer weighed heavily on him, for he knew that the true measure of a person's actions lay in their effect on others, not in popular approval. And he took quiet pride in the fact that, in standing up for what was right, he had set an example that the town would remember for years to come. The final weeks of the experience were filled with small celebrations of progress. Leela's confidence blossomed further, and she began to engage more with the town, helping neighbors, participating in community events, and sharing her newfound strength. People who had once doubted Tom's actions came to appreciate the wisdom behind them, and even the most skeptical began to speak of him with respect. The story, which had once caused tension and outrage, evolved into a lesson of courage, compassion, and the impact of principled action. One late afternoon, As the sun set and painted the hills in shades of pink and gold, Leela and Tom walked together along the edge of the pasture. The world around them was calm, but the events of the past weeks had left a lasting mark. Leela turned to Tom, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and determination. "I'll never forget what you did for me," she said softly. "You showed me what it means to have courage, not just in action but in heart." Tom smiled, a quiet warmth in his expression. "And you've shown me that strength can come from the most unexpected places," he replied. "Remember, courage isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, and steadfast. That's what makes it powerful." In that moment, the story of Willow Creek reached its gentle but meaningful conclusion. The town had learned a lesson about integrity, empathy, and courage. Leela had grown into a stronger, more confident person, ready to face life's challenges with determination and trust in herself. Tom had demonstrated that leadership and moral strength were not about following tradition blindly, but about making principled choices in the service of others. Though life in Willow Creek returned to its usual rhythm, the memory of what had happened lingered. People continued to speak of the rancher who acted boldly to protect and guide a young woman, of the courage she had discovered in herself, and of the way their story had inspired the community to consider the meaning of integrity, compassion, and bravery. The whisper that had begun it all, "Don't make me do this," had set in motion a chain of events that transformed lives, taught lessons, and reminded everyone that true strength often reveals itself in the quietest and most unexpected ways. And as the stars appeared above the hills, shining gently in the clear night sky, both Tom and Leela felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The journey had been challenging, uncertain, and at times daunting, but it had led to growth, understanding, and the reaffirmation that doing what is right, no matter the obstacles or opinions of others, was always worth the effort. Their story, though personal, had touched the town, leaving a lasting mark that would not be forgotten.